Good evening. It's one of the most controversial transport projects in decades. But today, the government gave the green light to HS2. Despite widespread protests, they're pressing ahead with a high-speed rail line between London and Birmingham.
HS2 will cost £32 billion, and opponents say that's a massive waste of money. But the government says it's vital for boosting the economy and will earn billions of pounds for the country in the long term.
Our correspondents are live across the Midlands tonight at a station gearing up for the future of train travel, at a business that will cut back on investment, and at Westminster, where we'll get the latest on the Tory MPs who say they will vote against the project and against their government.
But first, Keith Wilkinson has been looking at the detail of the plans which now put HS2 on track.
Trains travelling at 225 miles an hour. The London to Birmingham section could be operating in 14 years, running here to Curzon Street, first used in 1838.
We are ready for a new chapter in Britain's transport history, one that's designed to boost our economy and our country, just as the first coming of the railways, all the motorways, did for previous generations.
There are those who love it and those who hate it. The government says HS2 will cut journey times between London and Birmingham to 49 minutes, boost the economy by £47 billion over 60 years. In the future, it'll also run on to Manchester and Leeds and through the East Midlands. Opponents say it'll be a multi-billion-pound white elephant that will destroy Midlands countryside to provide an expensive service for rich people. Last year, the debate over HS2 took over an entire edition of Central Tonight.
The regeneration isn't going to create 40,000 jobs.
Are you honestly suggesting that building better transport infrastructure, whether it's airports or high-speed railways, does not create jobs and economic growth? This is Luddism.
Among those who expect to benefit hugely are the NEC and Birmingham Airport. They liken HS2 to high-speed rail schemes like this one in Germany. They say it's helped boost the prosperity of a number of cities there.
It's fantastic news because it will help give us connectivity to the rest of the country. It'll relieve the problems that we've got on the West Coast Main Line, which is full to bursting, and it'll make Birmingham a lot closer to London and indeed eventually to the other great cities of the UK.
Birmingham Airport currently handles 9 million passengers a year. Huge growth is now expected. They have permission for 27 million passengers by 2030. Now, because of HS2, that process could accelerate and increase. They could be handling 35 million passengers a year, the same as Gatwick. Opponents, however, point to less successful projects like a high-speed rail route in Holland, which has been running with empty carriages. There are many fears for the environment over HS2, like the destruction of ancient woodlands. Changes to the route have been announced to lessen the impact, including more than 22 miles of tunnels. In Warwickshire, for example, they're to move the route slightly further away from Middleton and Balsall Common. There'll be a longer tunnel at Burton Green. HS2 will avoid Kenilworth Golf Club. And there'll be a longer tunnel at Long Itchington Wood. The changes have not satisfied villagers and environmentalists. They say these tweaks will leave miles of countryside ruined forever.
Well, let's go live now to Keith Wilkinson at Curzon Street, which is the site of the proposed Birmingham city centre terminus. Now, Keith, the protesters aren't going to give up. Will this line be built, and will it be built on time?
Well, the government certainly seem determined to build it. Whether it will be built on time, well, that remains to be seen. More on that later from my colleague in Parliament, Alison Mackenzie. What we do know is that the old historic Curzon Street here was built in the 1800s, and the original Birmingham and London Railway was built in about 5 years. No fancy equipment in those days, just 20,000 strong men with picks and shovels back in the age of the horse and cart. But it wasn't all plain sailing for the railway builders of that time. They faced the formidable opposition of powerful men like William Wordsworth the poet, who was forever using his quill pen to attack them for ruining his beloved countryside. Nothing new then in railway protesting.
Keith, thank you for that. Well, hundreds of homes and businesses who are along the route of the HS2 project now face a very uncertain future.
Yes, Kate Fisher has been to one farm in Lichfield where 3 generations of family have helped it prosper so far. But the future disruption means it's looking a lot less rosy.
The Barnes families run Packington Moor Farm for generations. It's changed a lot since John's grandparents took it on in 1921. Now weddings take place in the converted oak barn and there's a farm shop and cafe. The family businesses employ more than 30 local people. But expansion will now be much harder.
We've got projects we would like to carry on with, but we can't just at the moment allocate money to it in case we don't get it back.
The new route will cut this farm in half, meaning the demolition of the family home and all their businesses.
It's a business that we've built up with a lot of hard work as a family unit, and that really now spans 3 generations in total. But also it holds such a lot of happy memories for the past bride and grooms, let alone the ones to come. So, you know, it plays a big part in a lot of people's lives.
Well, the venue I'm standing in, all the buildings around me, they will all be demolished when the new HS2 line is built right through the middle of this farm. This is a family business, and the Barnes' children both work here. One of them, Grace, is with me now. She works in the farm shop. Grace, have you had any word yet about compensation?
We haven't really had any correspondence at all yet. What we need to know now is a time frame and what kind of compensation we're looking at. I mean, how do you compensate a setup like this? It's 2 homes, 3 businesses, 2 new businesses. Do they look at 5 years figures, 10 years figures? Is there a formula they use? We need to know things like that. Once we have that kind of information, and we need it quickly, we can begin to make decisions about our future.
Grace, thank you very much indeed. Well, a firm decision from the government this morning, but this evening at Packington Moor, so much uncertainty.
Indeed, Kate, thank you very much. Let's go live now to our political correspondent, Alison McKenzie at Westminster. Alison, we're hearing extremely strong opinions on both sides here. Are those emotions matched in Westminster?
They certainly are, Samina. You have the prospect of Conservative MPs voting with Labour against their own government. More of that in a second. But Justine Greening, the Transport Secretary, in advance of her announcement today, she held a briefing for interested parties from the Midlands, and on that guest list was the Chief Executive of Centro, the Passenger Transport Authority in Birmingham, who is delighted at the announcement that the HS2 project is going to go ahead.
We've done a lot of work in terms of looking at the impacts of high-speed rail and also the impacts of improved local commuter services. And we believe it will increase the number of jobs in the West Midlands by 22,000 jobs and also increase the economic activity in the West Midlands by £1.5 billion a year.
One happy man, but of course awkwardness for the Conservative MPs along the route. They have lots of anger and fury they have to respond to, and we know that quite a few are going to be brave enough to vote against the government. I sounded out opinion, East Midlands and West Midlands.
Part of the beauty for people living in rural South Northamptonshire is the rural setting, and regardless of whether there's a green tunnel or not, it takes that away. So if this is to go ahead, I will be turning next to issues around compensation and the very real blight that's already been a problem but will obviously only continue and get worse.
My main concern about high-speed rail, I've made this point time and again, is the potential negative economic impacts on the region, on the West Midlands regional economy. There's a lot of evidence from high-speed systems on the continent that small economies linked to a larger economy by high-speed rail can suffer. And I don't believe the government have yet answered that particular concern.
So, Alison, we've had all the excitement about the announcement. What happens next?
Well, yes, very important. As you heard, that guest interviewed by Kate wants to know what is happening next. So let's look at the timetable on this, if we can. In spring 2012, the government will begin consultation on blight and compensation arrangements, and they are going to write to every interested party. What's known as a hybrid bill will be introduced in Parliament by the end of 2013, the start of the legislation process. Ministers want to decide on phase 2 of the route, the Y route, taking it through the East Midlands by the end of 2014. Meanwhile, those legal challenges will be started, and of course no guarantee it'll all get done by a general election in 2015. So will it go ahead? You can be assured there's lots and lots of challenges to come.
Alison, thanks very much indeed. Well, we'll have more on HS2 later in the programme, but for the moment let's turn to the rest of the day's news.